It's another Waiting for Next Year.com podcast. This week I'm talking to a Saints blogger, Andrew Juge. Did I pronounce that right?
You nailed it.
All right, cool. The Saints Nation, I noticed your website has a number of URLs that work. So the Saints Nation works, though. Yeah,
that's the main one. So if you're looking for it, that's the easiest way to get there, thesaintsnation.com.
And I guess wrote some answers to your questions there about the upcoming game. How are New Orleans Saints fans feeling after week one, obviously losing in overtime to Atlanta? I assume that was a game that Saints fans expected to win.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think anytime you go on the road, divisional matchup, and I think also you look at the history of the Saints Falcons, especially recently. Those two teams have really had some real close games. Even last year when the Falcons were 4-12, both games were within 4 points. So you kind of expect that every time, and I think Saints fans knew it would be a tough one, but they did expect to win it. And I think the main thing, you asked how they're feeling. I think the main thing is just a big surprise at how poorly the defense performed. Now, I think the kind of trademark of the Sean Payton era is obviously offense, and I think any fan of football outside of New Orleans recognizes the Saints as a high potent offense with maybe some difficulties on defense historically in the Sean Payton era. And that was certainly the case in Atlanta. But last year, with Rob Ryan and the Saints made a lot of progress on defense. They were ranked 4th in the NFL at the end of the season. So there was a lot of optimism that with the addition of Jairus Byrd, they could even maybe get better than that. But I think fans are hoping that the defensive performance was an aberration. But there's a major, major concern that that's hopefully not a sign of things to come, but there's a worry that it could be. So I think most fans right now they're just looking for the team to bounce back and respond from what was a pretty pathetic performance defensively.
It's funny, man. Browns fans loved Rob Ryan probably more than they loved his actual defense. And I get the sense that his personality and who he is and the long hair and the great quotes, I'm guessing Saints fans kind of feel the same way. I mean, obviously the roster is the roster and the players have to execute, but do you think they're left with that same feeling about Rob Ryan where they kind of like the dude and the personality more than they actually like the defense he puts out?
Oh, definitely. It's taken a life of its own. It helps that New Orleans is kind of its own unique thing, and I think the town's really embraced Ryan, and Ryan has really embraced the city. You can find Rob Ryan on any given night and even post-game sometimes at Miss May's, which is a local dive bar hangout with cheap drinks. So he's kind of immersed himself in the community, and it's if you know where you're looking, it's pretty easy to find him. So that's a big part of it too. And yeah, at this point, I think it's more a persona, a character, more so than it's even X's and O's or his abilities as a coach, which, by the way, are pretty incredible too.
Well, it's funny. Immersing yourself in the community means very different things depending on where your team is located, doesn't it?
Absolutely. No doubt about it. I mean, I think it's never a bad thing in New Orleans for the most part. Obviously, you can still get in trouble like you can anywhere, but for the most part, I mean, it's a rich culture, and obviously with the food and the partying and all that, and it's a work hard, play hard atmosphere, and I feel like Ryan is he embodies that.
Yeah, and you're right. You can get in trouble anywhere. It has more to do with the people than it does with the place. My wife's from Indianapolis, and the Pacers certainly have found some players over the last decade who could find trouble in that city, and that's not New Orleans.
No.
Culturally. But so tell me a little bit about how the game kind of developed. I mean, I'm sure most Browns fans maybe saw a few highlights, didn't really watch how the game developed. What was going on with the Saints? I mean, obviously the defense, we covered that, but how about the offense? They put up a lot of points, but were there points of frustration to the offensive performance?
No, not really. I thought the offense was in mid-season form. I mean, just firing on all cylinders. I tell you, I think there's a lot of optimism that if the defense can get it together, and certainly with Rob Ryan in the mix, you feel like he's going to be able to correct some of those things. The silver lining, going back to defense just real quickly for 1 second, one of the major problems with the team was tackling. And if you go to Pro Football Focus, at one point they had 23 missed tackles, the most for that week of any team. And I think they've reduced it since then. But obviously there were a lot of missed tackles, and that's something that you can clean up. So hopefully they can improve that. But I think offensively, we always expect the Saints to be able to throw the football, and they definitely did that. And rookie Brandon Cooks already looks like a phenom at receiver, and that's just another weapon for Drew Brees, on top of Colston and Jimmy Graham and Pierre Thomas, who's very involved in the passing game. And so the passing game looks as good as ever, but I think the most impressive thing is that the offensive line was dominant, and the running game was going. And so if the Saints are able to kind of fire on all cylinders with both rushing and passing, then you kind of get to a point, I think, where the efficiency of the passing game benefits that much more. So they're looking good right now.
So, and in more of a kind of overall viewpoint, I'm not trying to jinx anything. Everybody knows how great Drew Brees is, but age catches up with everybody. I just kind of wonder what's the fan philosophy around Drew Brees? Has anybody even thought about looking past him to the next guy, or is it just? I mean, he's still playing at a high level, so is it just? Well, you play him until he can't anymore.
He's such a hard worker. Obviously, an injury can change everything. We saw that even with Peyton Manning. He was fortunate to come back and perform at the high level he did, but with the neck injury, that could have been it for him. So, and obviously that's applicable to even a young player. I would put that disclaimer out there. But beyond that, I think Drew Brees goes to a level with nutrition, stretching, preparation. I mean, all athletes do it, but I think with Brees, it's almost a religious experience. And I really think that even though he's 34, he's kind of in the body of a 25-year-old, and it's one of those things where he's not a guy that takes a ton of hits. His release is so quick, and he's so methodical with his progressions and getting the ball out of there as quickly as possible, that it's not like an RG3 where he's a guy that's going to take a hit to his knee and that's going to be it, or at least percentage-wise, it's going to happen a lot less. So I don't really see an end in sight that's really near. I mean, as far as you can say for an NFL player in general, I don't think the fans are really looking at an era right now. I think it's really still Drew's show, and he joked earlier in the offseason that, hey, if he can, he wants to play till he's 45. I don't know if that's going to happen, but I don't really see a decline for the next 2 or 3 years at the level of his performance now and the way he takes care of his body.
All right, so on my survey, I'll check the box for denial. Got it.
Exactly.
No, it's awesome. He's even as a Browns fan, he's such a fun guy to root for. Obviously not this Sunday, but one of the good guys, one of the ones that you don't want to see fail. Tom Brady, on the other hand, just as many people hate him as love him, but I don't get that sense that, and I think Peyton Manning probably is not hated as much as Tom Brady, but I don't get the sense that Drew Brees is hated maybe divisionally by your divisional opponents, but I don't get the sense that people root against him actively.
You definitely will get a different answer in Atlanta. I think he's pretty widely hated there. But
that just makes sense.
Yeah, that just makes sense. But no, he's a good guy. He's a family guy with the right priorities. He says the right things. Doesn't make mistakes really off or on the field. So he's a hard guy to hate. I think you can be jealous of his success or mad at him for how he's performed against your team. But he's a guy that by and large does things the right way. And I got to tell you, the city of New Orleans in general is very fortunate to have kind of a leader in the community. And I know that sounds dramatic, but football is really a religious experience down in New Orleans. And so, it's one of those things where I think, the city's fortunate to have him and, have a guy that, some of our kids can look up to.
And honestly, I'm not making this up, and it's kind of goofy, but because of Drew Brees, I tip on takeout now. That whole story came about where they were like, he doesn't tip at all, and then it turns out he was picking up a $60 order. It was takeout, and he left $2 or $3 on a takeout order.
I have friends in the industry, and I've always tipped on takeout. Like,
I never did.
Maybe
it never
not
occurred
20,
to me.
Yeah, never 20%, but I'll put 10%. I actually thought when I saw that, even though I knew it was takeout, I felt that was a little low. I was like, Drew Brees can't tip a little bit better than $3 on a $60 bill or whatever.
See, I think $2 or $3 is all that's required to tip on takeout. I didn't know we were going to talk about this today. This is real culture war type stuff.
Yeah, no, I think some people feel like you should tip 20% no matter what, which I think is ridiculous. But I know some people in the industry feel that way. But when you have $100 million contract, I think you can spare a couple extra bucks.
Yeah, no, that's true. I get that. So I do need. I don't really want to talk a ton about, Roger Goodell and all this kind of stuff, but I am interested in the take from Saints fans because of Saints run-in with Roger Goodell over the whole bounty scandal and Sean Payton's year-long suspension. Are you able to disconnect the two things, or is it all part and parcel, just an opinion about Roger Goodell going on in Saints land now?
No, I think every Saints fan is completely biased based on the experience, and it's impossible to disconnect.
And Cleveland fans would never judge anybody for being biased, by the way. I mean, we still talk about Art Modell to this day. So
Understood. No, I remember the history behind that well. But yeah, I think it's I think anything that Goodell's involved with forever, for Saints fan will always be associated with Bountygate, regardless of what it is. And so I think that clouds any sort of rationale or reasonable opinion of anything that he does. At the same time, I think you can look back to a lot of the Bountygate rulings and that whole experience and draw some parallels to some of the situations coming up now and some inconsistencies in how he treated things. And so I think when you start to view that, I think there was a lot of distrust with Goodell from the players, specifically from players associated with the Saints. And now, you look at kind of some of the inconsistencies that are coming up compared to that situation now. And I mean, from my personal viewpoint, again, it's biased. I think probably more rational than the average Saints fan. But I just don't see how anyone in the league could trust him at this point.
Yeah, I think, in a lot of ways, I'm annoyed by the level of shock. It's like, is anybody really shocked that Roger Goodell or a corporate guy might try and cover his butt or lie or mess things up? I mean, it's not. I understand why people might be upset about it or say, oh, he should be fired or resign. But there's no debate to be had. I don't see, nobody's taking the support for Roger Goodell's side right now. So it's almost strange to me that the coverage is unfolding the way it is and the talk shows are unfolding the way they are regarding this topic, because it's just everybody kind of screaming in the same direction.
Well, I think, for Saints fans, it's not a surprise. And I think a lot of them take the attitude of, hey, people, we tried to tell you. We told you so. But this time, this makes Twitter really fun right now, because he is just getting crucified on Twitter and in the media. And for Saints fans, I mean, it's kind of a karma play here that just feels good. It feels good to read about this stuff and have Bountygate brought back up, and so many media members are now discrediting that stuff. If you remember when it was hot off the press, I think people's inclinations were to believe a lot of it, and
I did,
and judge without really reading the information that was at hand and knowing what was available. And look, I'm not trying to expunge the Saints or say that they were free of any guilt in this situation. Certainly, Greg Williams. I mean, you listen to the audio, and it is what it is. But I think, again, how Goodell went about the punishments, how he went about his judgment on this stuff, and when you give a guy that much power and you allow him to kind of solely dictate how things play out, he's going to have an agenda and he's going to abuse that power. And I just think it's one of those things where, there needs to be more checks and balances, and the CBA, unfortunately for everyone, affords him that luxury.
Yeah. Yeah, it does. And kind of moving on from that, one of the questions that you asked me in the Q&A on the Saints Nation blog was about Barkevious Mingo, and I'll be honest, it never even occurs to me. I almost sometimes forget where he came from. It's not exactly SEC country up here, and so I knew all about Barkevious Mingo and watched all his highlights when he was drafted and everything, but it didn't occur to me that people back down in Louisiana and Saints country would still be following his career. How closely?
Well, I think most Saints. I'm a diehard LSU fan. Baton Rouge is about an hour from New Orleans by car, and most Saints fans are LSU fans as well. So, Barkevious was one of those guys that was a big favorite at LSU, and he was such a freakish athletic talent that he could beat anyone around the edge. And so, he packed up the sacks, the quarterback pressures, the hits on quarterbacks anytime they were throwing. But to be honest, I was surprised he got drafted so high. I just didn't really see his body being able to transition to the NFL unless he put on a lot more weight, because I just didn't see him really being able to play the run or do much just besides being a pass rushing specialist. So, and that's not to say he didn't have a place in the NFL. I just thought, I can't remember, you guys drafted him like 7th, something like that?
Yeah, I don't remember which one.
Yeah, somewhere near the top 10.
I try and block out how high the Browns' picks have been.
I don't blame you. So anyway, I was surprised to see him drafted that high, but nonetheless, he's a guy you root for, certainly, but he was a fan favorite at LSU and in Baton Rouge. So I think Saints fans kind of pay attention to that and want him to do well,
Well, and he's one of the real kind of lead by example good guys. I think I read somewhere he's never had a drink. He treats his workouts and his body as perfectly as possible. He's been a really good example for some fellow rookies who were drafted the same time or joined the team at the same time. Armani Bryant was his roommate through rookie camp, and Armani Bryant got arrested for DUI 2 weeks after being signed or drafted. He was drafted in the 7th round. And he has been that good example guy as well as showing that freak athleticism. So Browns fans are definitely hopeful. And the idea is with Mike Pettin, the new head coach, the defensive head coach, that they can maximize everything Barkevious Mingo can be. But it's still... It's only his second year. It's tough.
He's so raw. He was like this at LSU. He's so raw. From a pure talent standpoint, his ceiling is Javon Curse in his prime. That's his ceiling. That's what we're talking about in terms of potential. That guy could really be that good and that special. But he's got to put it all together. And his game, at least coming out of college, I haven't had a chance to watch him as much since he's come to the NFL. But it was really unpolished. So that works in college, when the opponents aren't as good, the techniques aren't as good. Obviously he was able to just beat someone based on pure raw talent and skill. But when you get to the NFL, you really have to start refining that stuff. But, I think he's a good bet. I think he's a good guy to bet on because, like you said, his work habits are what you need. And so, I think the main thing with him is I just question if he has the body for the NFL, to kind of take the beating on a snap-by-snap basis. And so the main thing I would worry about with him is just injuries, just being light in the pads. But if he can bulk up, I don't know, has he gained much weight?
No, and he despises the questions. He's done being asked about his weight. It's funny.
Yeah. So, I still think that's kind of the one lingering thing I have about him that's maybe a question mark. But, again, I don't throw the Javon Curse potential out lightly. I really think he could be that good.
Yeah. All right, last but not least, let's talk about the actual matchup. Obviously, the Saints are favored. They should be favored. They should beat the Browns, even on the road, outside. Do Saints fans even worry about Drew Brees being outside anymore? Because that used to be kind of one of the lazy media tropes about the Saints.
Yeah, it's so lazy. It's one of those things.
I'm really happy I called it lazy.
Yeah. It's one of those things where Brees is an all-world quarterback at home. His rating career is like 108 in the Superdome. And that's good enough to be better than Peyton Manning, at home. And so it's one of those things where if you compare it to that, sure, he's poor on the road. I think his career rating on the road is above 90. That by any standard, that's a high quality performance by a quarterback. But it doesn't measure up to playing at home in perfect conditions with no crowd noise when you're on offense, and all that stuff. So sure, I think if you're comparing him at home versus on the road, I think any team you would find performs better at home. But I think in terms of does he perform poorly on the road? Absolutely not. He's still putting up high numbers. He still produces. Now I will say I think when it's windy, and I haven't really looked at the conditions yet for Sunday, but when it's windy, Brees his throws can sail on him a little bit. He doesn't have the big time arm of a Ben Roethlisberger or a Matt Stafford, where he just the velocity is. He's more about technique, location, and he throws a nice deep ball. And he does have a strong arm, but he doesn't kind of have the ability to power through the wind like some of these other guys. So if it's a windy day, I think that maybe affects him more than the cold or precipitation.
It's going to be 66, partly cloudy, winds out of the east at 8 miles an hour. So
you're on it, man.
It shouldn't be so bad. Why?
Yeah.
I'm a Googler, man. No, so is there anything in particular that concerns you about the matchup? Obviously, we talked about the Browns' running game and the Saints' running defense on the blog post. Is there any great concern about the Saints coming into this matchup, or do most Saints fans and commentators just expect them to take care of their business?
No, I think there's still a high degree of confidence in the offense, and I'm not going to say they're going to put up 34 points again. It's a little bit different playing in Cleveland than it is on the road in a dome stadium. But I still think, and if you look at what the Steelers were able to do offensively, I think the Saints are much better offensively than the Steelers even. So they'll find ways to hurt Cleveland, and I think they'll be able to put points on the board. I think, again, the main concern is defensively, and I think Brian Hoyer is probably not going to put up the kind of yards that Matt Ryan did. And obviously Matt Ryan threw for the most passing yards in Atlanta Falcon history with 448 last week. So
it was insane.
Yeah, it was insane. But I think the pass defense maybe won't suffer quite as much against the Browns. So I think really the key matchup here is the Browns running the football and the Saints defending the run. I think if the Browns are able to gain some yards on the ground, milk the clock, keep the ball away from Drew Brees, and the Saints aren't effective at stopping that, then this starts to kind of maybe close the window, close the gap in terms of the difference in talent between the two rosters. If the Saints are able to effectively stop the run, then I think it skews way in favor of the Saints. And particularly, I think it's those plays like 1st and 10. How are they doing on 1st and 10 with those runs? Are they getting 2 yards and setting up a 2nd and 8 where you're kind of in play action or pass territory, or are they getting 6 yards where it's 2nd and 4 and it opens up the playbook wide open? And so those are really, I think, the keys to the game in terms of when the Browns have the football, and what would dictate whether it's going to be a close game or not.
Well, and Matt Ryan had a ridiculous day, and I do like him as a player. But, he's also got Julio Jones, Roddy White, Harry Douglas. They add Devin Hester this year. That's murderer's row in terms of wide receivers. It's hard to imagine much better receiving cores than that.
Yeah, there's no doubt. They're pretty multiple in what they can do to hurt you, so it makes it difficult, kind of deciding who you're going to put on who and how you're going to rotate your coverage. Is there any chance Josh Gordon plays this game? Is that still in limbo?
It's funny, man. He's down working at the auto dealership, and he was telling anybody who would listen that he thought he could play on Sunday. He thought there was a chance he might play on Sunday.
Yeah, that's the rumor, and apparently the Saints have prepared for contingencies in case he was available to play. So, based on that, obviously that's a game changer, and that could affect things. But otherwise, yeah, I think defensively the Saints are much more set up to handle this receiving core and in general other receiving cores. I mean, I would put up if there's one strength on that Falcon team, they probably have as good of a set of receivers as anybody out there.
But no matter what, no matter who's playing receiver, and of course Josh Gordon would be you got to think he'd be on a mission if somehow he got lucky enough to be able to play this week. But no matter who the Browns have in that receiving core, with Brian Hoyer playing quarterback, they are going to have to run the ball effectively to set up the pass. And I know that's like a cheesy cliche, got to run to set up the pass. But with the Browns, it's actually true, because if you send out Brian Hoyer and try and have him throw 50 to 60 times a game, which is pretty much what Norv Turner was doing last year with Willis McGahee as running back, so you can't really blame him, but you can't be successful that way.
It's at least, it's funny. I've seen games where the Saints are completely incapable of running the football. And so Sean Payton, by the third quarter, decides, you know what, we're not even going to bother anymore. We're just going to throw every play. And I've seen the Saints win games that way, and that's both the blessing and the curse of having Drew Brees on your roster. I think sometimes when you know what you are with the Browns, I think sometimes the Saints try to pretend that they can run the football. And this year I think they can, but in years past they would try to commit to it. It wouldn't work out, and then they would kind of ditch it. And I think with the Browns, they know what Brian Hoyer is. They know they can't get into a position where he's throwing every play, and so they commit to the run. And I think at least there's an identity for him there, and you have a good enough offensive line that you can execute that. So, but yeah, again, I think that's critical. I think you look at a guy like Brian Hoyer, if he's throwing more than 30 times a game, that's probably not a good sign.
Yeah. All right, last but not least, I predicted the score, which I don't love doing, but I'm going to make you do it as well. I said that the Browns would lose 28-20. First of all, did you like my prediction?
I love it.
Did you think it was like crazy? Well, do you think it's realistic?
I like any prediction that has the Saints winning by 1 point or more.
Right. No, I got you.
No, I think, look, the Saints don't have to impress me in this game. I don't feel like they need to come out, and this is the second week of the season. I don't expect them to have everything cleaned up and kind of have hit the peak performance of the season yet. And obviously we talked about the tackling. That's a work in progress. I don't see that transforming. I mean, I hope it does, but I don't see that transforming in a week. So I think the main thing for me, I kind of expect this honestly to be an ugly game. I think the Browns are probably going to be a little bit tougher on the Saints defensively than the Falcons were, and I think the Saints are going to try to run the football. I think Cleveland, if they're smart, they're going to run the football every play. They're not going to take risks throwing and creating turnovers, that sort of thing. So keep a tight playbook and a tight game plan going up against the Saints. So I kind of view this as a game that could be a much lower scoring than some people expect. I could see like a 24-13 or a 21-17 type game. So I'm kind of expecting it to be a little bit uglier than people expect. And I think Cleveland is a tough team. They're a tough football team, and I think they're going to surprise some people this year. I don't think this is a team that's ready to make the playoffs, and I don't think this is a team that. But I think they showed last week against the Steelers that they're capable of going out there and upsetting teams that are better than them.
So, all right, well that's good. I don't. You gave like a range of scores. Do you have an actual? I'm gonna nail you down.
I like it. I'm gonna stick with that 24-13.
Okay.
I think the Saints score maybe a touchdown late to pull away and make it look worse than it was, but I think through early in the fourth quarter it's dicey, and I think once they kind of get to 24-13, maybe Cleveland just hasn't done enough offensively to make you really feel like they can go down the field and get a critical score. But yeah, so I'll throw a 24-13 out there.
Well, and if Josh Gordon plays, the Browns are going to win 147-5, so it's going to be great.
I appreciate you giving us that safety.
All right.
I think you're giving our defense a little too much credit, but I'll take it.
That's funny. Well, thanks so much for coming on. It was good to answer some questions for your website. I'm glad you were able to come on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks again for your help this week, and I'm sure our paths will be crossing again, and good luck to you guys this season.
All right, that's Andrew Juge from the Saints Nation. You can find him on all his links for Twitter and Facebook on thesaintsnation.com. And until next time, it's been the Waiting for Next Year.com podcast.
Waiting for next year.